Hey guys, it's Julian. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make in Verruf our label group style hard melodic techno. I picked up on a bunch of new stuff from these tracks. In particular in Verruf, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that I'm going to be breaking down for you guys today. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And let's dive in. Alright, so we're at 140 BPM. Right off the bat, we have the rumble kick, which sounds like this. So this is a pretty straightforward kick, as you can imagine, just the kick part at least is really simple. It's just a nice, punchy, hard kick. This is one I've layered. It's got that like really full sounding, almost like ravey, like boom, to it. And then the rumble. It's actually a pretty standard rumble, but what makes it a little bit unique is this audio effect right here. So you can see, I'll turn everything off. So yeah, it just starts with the basic kick, and then we put it through a delay. And then we're doing that, so we have that. And then after that, we have this audio effect track. So yeah, this is what's creating the sound. You make a simple rumble like this, and then usually what you would do here is you would just put like one distortion, and then you would cut off the highs and the mid-range. But here, the idea is that we're kind of creating a percussion loop just with the rumble. Like if you listen to this, just the kick and the rumble alone really add like a lot to the track. And if we turn these off, you can hear a lot of those layers of texture are kind of missing. So that's the idea behind this. It's kind of like in the beginning of tracks like Lead where you hear it and it's literally just the kick and like that. This is how they're doing that. It's just with this multi-band distortion on the rumble because it allows you to create this like nice crunch in the highs, nice crunch in the mids, and then you can keep the low end really fat and punchy. And yeah, this is a little bit of a variation on a technique that I showed you guys actually in yesterday's video about how to make the hard kicks. Then after that, we just have a bit of drum bus. You can see I've got the boom on there. And this is just being sidechained to the main kick. And then I have this EQ at the end. This is just cutting at 25 hertz. So it's cutting out those low frequencies that we're not really hearing, that are going to kind of take away headroom from the mix and make it a bit muddy. We're just getting rid of those. And then we're also cutting at 100 hertz. And this just makes a little bit of room for the kick because obviously, when you do this method of like distorting a rumble, you're going to end up with a lot of like loud resonant frequencies essentially. And so this is really good for cutting those out, particularly where they would clash with the kick. Like we're just cutting that a little bit to make room for the kick. And yeah, that is it for that. Then we have this percussion loop, which sounds like this. So what this is it's actually meant to kind of fit on top of the rumble, how we have like this whole percussion loop happening there. Then, like I said, this just kind of fits into that. These three elements kind of come together to create that main groove. So the way that I made this is actually one of the bonus percussion loops from my 50 hard techno kicks sample pack, which if you haven't already checked that out, definitely go check that out. The link is at the top of the description. But yeah, it's one of those percussion loops. And then what I've done here is I've taken it and I chopped it because what was happening was, if I reset the fades on this one, you'll see how there's like a click there? It's not like a click like you need to do a fade in terms of like, actually like one of those like weird clicks and pops that you hear. But there's just too much transient in there. Like if you listen, it clashes with the transient on the kick. So I just took the fades on these and just did like that. And now you still get the percussion loop, but then we're still letting that kick transient shine. And that's really going to be the key here. If you want to make like these hard, aggressive tracks that sound really messy and really full, it's little tiny things like this that are going to make it all work. Because obviously, if you kind of do it all like just super all over the place and messy and raw, you might get that sound, but it's also going to sound all over the place and messy. So you got to keep in mind like little things like this, just letting that kick transient breathe by fading that in there, those little tiny things each step of the way are going to add up and ultimately make this work a lot better. So then for effects on here, we basically just have a low pass filter, which is cutting out some of those highs. Kind of makes it fit better into that groove, because we really didn't want any aggressive high end with this one. Then I have a high pass filter to cut out the lows and make sure it doesn't clash with the rumble. Then I have this just being sidechained to the kick, and then I have my ultimate stereo widening rack on this as well. So here's without that, and with it. The idea here is that this is doing some multi-band widening. So we're just making the mids and the highs a little bit wider, but it's still leaving the most of the sound pretty much stereo. So then it can just kind of spread out the highs and the mids where we want a lot of width, but it's not going to be too wide to where it'll mess up the whole thing. Then we have this little clap, which if I play that with the last percussion loop, you can hear. You see that just plays every 2 bars, kind of accentuating what's happening in there, just like a little groove element. Then we have the snare. So this is that style of snare like you hear in a lot of these tracks. The key is you just want to find something that has a lot of to it. Like if you listen to this one, it's almost all you really don't want that much punch. And with this snare, I actually had to kind of cut out some of that with the high pass filter there. Again, you just want this nice, crisp snare like that that's just going to sit really well over the kick. And then I also just have a bit of reverb on that. Yeah, you can hear that just cuts right through the mix. Then we have the bass. So what's happening here is we're in the key of G sharp minor, and we're just using notes from that key basically. But this is kind of like the chord progression from the track. With these tracks, a lot of the times, obviously it's techno, you're not gonna have a 1-4-5 chord progression. But just having this element, this big fat respace here, kind of playing these low notes that are gonna hold down especially underneath that lead. That's a big part of these tracks. So, yeah, the way I wrote this is, again, just kind of starting in that scale. But something that I've noticed with these tracks is that you don't always want your first note to be the root note of the key that you're in. So, for example, here, we're starting on C sharp. So, technically, that's actually the 4th. But then what it allows us to do is we start on there, then we go to the 6th, the minor 7th, and then back up to the root note there. So now, the whole time, you kind of subconsciously know that this is G sharp minor, but then when it hits this note finally, at the end, and it just rings out on that, it just becomes very, very satisfying, compared to, if you started it on G sharp, you're not really going to have that same impact as when you go from up here, and then you hear the low note, and it walks up, and then we land perfectly on G sharp. So that's something to keep in mind there. It's kind of how it's resolving, because I think that's a big part of the dynamic in these tracks, especially with the chord structure. Now, for the sound on this one, it's actually made with 2 layers inside of this instrument rack. So it's actually just 2 analogs. What we have is we have this first one, which is 2 saw waves. They're an octave up, detuned a lot, and then those just have some unison. So that's kind of the main one that you hear, but then underneath that, we just have this low saw wave, which is an octave below those. It doesn't have any unison. It's just super clean, just a nice, fat, powerful saw wave. And so then you put those together and you get the perfect combination of the wide unison synth with the really full sounding saw wave down the middle. Because when you hear these in a lot of tracks, you might be tempted to think, okay, it's just saw wave with a bunch of unison. That's what it is. But you really have to kind of finesse that. You can't just go in and just think it's just going to be that, because that's really not going to sound that good. If I just play the unison saw wave on its own, you can hear it's wide, and you really get a lot of mid-range, but it's not really filling out the track that well. Then when we add in the low one, now it really fills out the full part of the track where we want it to be. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, it's not always just, getting a side wave, detuning it. A lot of times, you have to kind of play around with it and try different combinations and things. Maybe you have one where it's like, one of these is an octave up and detuned, and then one is down, and then you have the unison on. And then this one, there's no unison, but it's an octave up. Like, any different combination of these. But I really recommend playing around with them, because that's essentially what's going to give you your own unique sound. Then we just have a bit of chorus on that to kind of spread it out. I have this multi-band distortion, which is really similar to the one I showed you on the Rumble, but this is really good for these respaces. Here is without this. And then with it. So yeah, it just really crunches it up and gives it that kind of sound like you hear in these tracks. With this one, it's all just the amp. So you can see like we have this one and this one, which is really similar on the mids. But you can see I turned the highs down a little bit. And then we're just letting the lows breathe. Because that already sounds good as it is. You don't need to go and distort that range. So now, instead of just like putting distortion on everything and just having that one layer, now we have a layer of this, a layer of this, and a layer of this. And so we're creating a really fat bass through layering with the audio effect track rather than, going and adding a bunch of drum buffs at the end or something like that. But then the last things on there are just the compressor side chaining into the kick. Pretty straightforward. And then this high pass filter with this EQ8 here, which is going to be pretty important. Like, where you set that is going to kind of like make or break your track. Because if you make it too low, it's just going to clash with the rumble. So you just want to make sure you cut it like right at that point where you're not cutting out too much. There's still a pretty good amount of the bass left. But it can also still let through that rumble. Then we have the main hi-hat. So this is just two layers. We have this open hi-hat, which you can see I actually low pass just a tiny bit. Here's without that. And then with it, just cuts off some of those like very bright high frequencies so that this isn't too sharp in the mix. And then this closed hi-hat, which you can see adds the punch because the open hi-hat on its own is good, but it doesn't really have like a to it. You need that punch. So that's where the closed hi-hat comes in. And then finally, the last sound here is this lead. So this is also using the G sharp minor scale, but again, kind of goes back to what I was saying with the bass. With this one, we actually never even touched G sharp. So you can see like we're using C sharp there, the fourth, this F sharp here, which would be the minor seventh, the sixth, the fifth, and then once we do get to G sharp in the bass, you can see it kind of resolves. It's just like I was saying with the bass line. It's like, this doesn't always have to just be playing the root note. You can get creative and like it really speaks to knowing your scales, like just understanding like where you are on the keyboard, and like once you start writing in the key of G sharp minor, like just knowing which notes are gonna work so that you can get creative with it and so you can really play around. Now for the sound on this one, I was trying to create something a little bit different, and the way that this lead is made is it's using operator. And the secret here is it's white noise and a little bit of a sine wave. You can see there's not any FM happening. And then what you do is you put the white noise into a bandpass filter with a really high resonance. And then what we can do is we can right click on frequency and see where it says play by key. See how, okay, so if I set that back to default, this frequency key, watch that when I right click here. Hit play by key. So now it turns that all the way up. And what that is it's key tracking, meaning if you play a low note on the keyboard, it'll play a low note. And if you play a high note on the keyboard, it'll play a higher frequency on the filter. And so, what we've now created is with the resonance, we have a pitch, and then with the filter frequency, it's moving with the key. Essentially, we're playing the filter. If I turn the filter off, it's literally just noise. So yeah, this is a really nice way to create that kind of like more dark, like haunting, spooky lead. And then we just have a bit of echo on that, a bit of reverb as well, just giving it some space, and then some drum bus. Typically with this sound, you are going to have to do something to make it hit a little bit more coming out of the synth, because if I turn that off, it can be a bit flat and kind of thin sounding, but that drum bus just gives it a lot of nice texture. And yeah. So that is going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp for just $5. This is a really great way to support me if you guys are enjoying these videos as well, so definitely go consider picking that up. And yeah, thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.